This is CapCan Knows, the official podcast of the Capital Area College Access Network. We're excited to engage the community in conversations about college access. I'm Michelle Strauss, the Executive Director of the College Access Network. I'm joined by our AmeriCorps Vista, Deanna Yapi-Sofa, and three of my friends and partners in the community, Sarah Himes Greer from Public Sector Consultants, Emm Bostwick from LEAP, and last but not least, Carrie Rosingana from the Capital Area Michigan Works. We're delighted to talk with you today about childcare. So welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Glad to be here.
We begin all of our podcasts with a personal story of who encouraged you to continue education beyond high school and why it was important to you. Could you tell us your reason?
Both of my parents were educators. My mom was a high school teacher and my dad was a professor. So education was always a really high priority in our home. And after I finished my bachelor's in anthropology and Latin, which is surprisingly not so marketable, I returned to my roots working in nonprofits, which pairs with my desire to help people and make things better. And then I eventually pursued graduate school, again, with the support from my family and my friends, to get my master's in public policy and continue working on helping people and making things better from a policy perspective.
And for me, I also share a parent who is a high school teacher as well. So I knew that continuing education was always really important, and that was instilled in me from a young age. However, my senior year of high school, as I was debating where to go, I experienced an injury that prevented me going to the ideal college I was looking at for soccer. And it really made me pivot. It made me realize I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated high school. So I decided to go to Lansing Community College, where I pursued an associate's degree in political science. And then from there, I was looking around Michigan for public university that I could pursue my bachelor's in. And that's where I ended up at James Madison College at Michigan State University, which was a great choice. And I was super happy with it. Hadn't even heard about it prior to my LCC time. So I'm really glad I took that time to find it, really. And therefore, I found what I loved, which was public policy and working in education and economic development, which really complement each other.
We have a lot of public policy people in the room. Carrie, round us out.
So, like my counterparts, I very much grew up in a household where the importance of continuing your education was really stressed. My mom was a public health nurse, and so she always talked about the continuing education that was needed for her job. And my dad was a chemist by trade, becoming a utilities director in a public workforce dynamic up north in Michigan. So when I went to school, I went to Michigan State University, and I was planning to actually become a music educator. And that was my career pathway. But after 2 years, I really decided that that was not the right fit for me long term. So had to pivot like Emma and figure out, okay, now what do I do? So I realized that the coursework that really was interesting to me was, sociology, psychology. And I ended up getting a degree in family community service from Michigan State University with an emphasis on early childhood education, which really is tied directly to the work and conversation we're going to be having here today. And now I'm very fortunate to work as a workforce development professional, and we get to help people figure out what their pathway and their career goals are. So it really kind of has come full circle for me. So it's always a great opportunity to have conversations like the one we'll be having today.
Great.
It's nice to hear three strong women and what your paths are.
Now that we're going to begin our conversation about early childhood, can you define early childhood for our audience, Carrie? And are there any requirements to become an early childhood teacher here in Michigan?
Yeah, great question. So if you were to look up what the formal definition is for early childhood, it's classified as 0 to 8. So that would be, thinking about it from pre-K all the way up into about first, second grade. It's technically considered early childhood from a definition perspective. To become an early childhood professional teacher or educator, there is a pathway that you can take. You can get a credential first that is short-term in nature, called a CDA. You can then also have a career, an associate degree in early childhood. And then you can also go into getting a bachelor's in early childhood. And there are a variety of different degrees you can get that connect to that. You can get endorsements for teaching related to early childhood, or you could even do something like I did, which was my major was not just defined as early childhood, but I took coursework that enabled me to be an early childhood educator. So there really is that full spectrum. What I will say is for teaching in Michigan here, it can depend on what sort of a classroom you're teaching in. If you are working as a lead teacher in a Head Start classroom or a GSRP classroom, a lead teacher is required to have a bachelor's degree. If you are in a program that may not be a GSRP or a Head Start, there may be a little bit more leeway for you to have one of those other credentials that would allow for you to still be a lead teacher. And for assistants, oftentimes they may have that CDA, or they may be working on getting coursework to complete that sort of a certification program in order to maybe move into their career into a lead teaching position. So that's kind of the roundabout way of saying there's a wide variety of credentials you can get and a wide variety of pathways you can take depending on what your interest is there in that program.
Thanks, Carrie. So I saw a headline recently that said COVID broke childcare. We can all talk about that. But what I really want to focus on is that Governor Whitmer has prioritized childcare in her budget and in the focus of the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, which we've all been engaged with. So talk a little bit about your experience, Emma and Carrie, in becoming the co-chairs of our local coalition. And Sarah can help round us out talking about why it's important for us to have this early childhood conversation as a community. So maybe I'll have Emma start us off.
Sounds good. So back of October of 2022, the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, or ECIC, opened up the opportunity for a regional planning grant via a coalition model. And so we were super excited about this opportunity to pursue this brand new grant that would really help build a baseline of data for our region. So that October, we applied through a co-lead model with the United Way of South Central Michigan and also Capital Area Michigan Works. And through that, we were able to really build a strong coalition of providers, childcare providers, parents, organizations that all relate with the early childhood system, including the ISDs and the local RESAs. And from there, I think have built a really strong network of folks that are really interested in growing the number of high quality childcare centers that we have in the region, but also looking at those barriers that come with it. So I'll hand it over to Carrie to talk a little bit more about kind of what we've been doing.
Yeah, I think something too that's important to emphasize here too is traditionally economic development and workforce development agencies haven't necessarily been leading these type of conversations in the past, along with our United Way partner here locally. What I think has been really critical for our region is we do have to realize that child development and not having the work staff that you need and having programs that are accessible to families who need that care, it really is an economic challenge and a workforce development challenge that we are encountering here, which is why I think it's been a really critical part for us all to play in this discussion, along with public sector consultants who's really been guiding everything that we do. We have to think about, as the governor is prioritizing, a pre-K for all model for all 4-year-olds, what are you going to need in terms of the talent pipeline? How are we going to address that? How are we making sure that those childcare opportunities align with what our workforce needs in terms of second and third shift? And how are our educators, who are themselves business owners in early childhood, how are we making sure that they have the supports they need to be able to retain their talent, to find their talent, to cultivate it internally, and make sure that they have those supports in place? And what I think we're finding is there's going to need to be a lot of advocacy, not only regionally, but at the statewide level, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done so that we can really help address the challenges that we're up against.
And
Yeah.
I'm delighted to, I guess, co-chair with you as part of my other hat at United Way, to be able to round out the conversation about that this is really more than probably a 4-legged table rather than a 3-legged stool. community of workforce, of educators, and our business partners. So let's jump over to Sarah and let you round us out on the context as it relates to the bigger conversation and starting to dive in a little bit to what we've been learning.
Yeah, I think Carrie really hit the nail on the head when she was discussing as far as how critical childcare is to workforce development, because one of the reasons that early childhood education is so important to focus on is that access to childcare that fits a family's needs is a key factor in the ability of those parents or those caregivers to be able to participate in the workforce and contribute to the state's economy. And additionally, research is showing that children's ages 0 to 8 is an absolutely critical time for development. So we know that high quality early education is going to set those kids up for success later in life, and increasing the opportunity to access high quality childcare is really about playing the long game for Michigan's residents to set them up for success.
Great, thank you.
Sarah and Emma, can you give us an overview of the childcare workforce challenges that we're experiencing in the capital area?
I think we need to start by talking about what people refer to as the childcare gap. So across the state of Michigan, there's a shortage of childcare spots that are available when you look at the number of children under the age of 5. And not every family with a child under the age of 5 wants or needs childcare, but they use those numbers to estimate the gap between the number of children and the number of childcare spots that are available. And that gap is about 54%, which means that for every childcare spot available, there's about 1.9 children. So that's what people refer to as that childcare gap. And what that means is that some parents and caregivers aren't able to participate in the workforce at the level they want to when they don't have access to childcare that fits their needs. So that's a limiting factor for that family and for the economy. And, through some of the research that PSC has been doing, we've been talking to parents and caregivers, and I've heard stories about parents who would like to work full or part-time, but when there's not childcare available, or when that childcare is so expensive that the math doesn't work for them to work and pay for childcare.
And I'll just jump in again about the statewide perspective and then go a little bit more into the regional. But from the statewide perspective, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce recently released a report that identified that because of childcare issues in Michigan, we're losing out about $2.8 billion annually. And we know that when they looked a little bit deeper, that 14% of parents left a job in the past 6 months due to childcare. So we know that access to childcare really impacts our local region when we're looking in deeper into these data, this data that we've pulled with public sector consultants throughout surveys, throughout focus groups. And we know that that's really going to have a long-term effect. It already has, and that investment into childcare needs to happen like we've seen at the state level. And we know that the ability to participate in the labor force has many barriers, and we know that this childcare issue is one of the primary barriers that is preventing folks from accessing their work and their day-to-day livelihood.
And when we think about the cost of childcare, there's just a lot of families that can't afford to pay both kind of the general cost of living, which are things like housing and groceries, and add in the cost of childcare. PSC was recently looking at some median household income in a few different parts of the state. So for example, Emm County, the median household income is about $58,000 annually. But the average cost of center-based care for an infant in Emm County is about $12,000 annually. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has defined affordable childcare as no more than 7% of your income. But the cost of center-based infant care in Emm County is about 20% of someone's income if they're making close to that median household income for the area. So, the cost of living and the cost of different kinds of care for different age children is going to vary around the state. But right now, the cost of childcare is closer to what's the generally accepted percentage that your mortgage should be instead of childcare. So that's a huge gap between what families might earn and the costs that are in front of them.
And according to some data that was pulled earlier in this year, as we were going through our baseline assessment, ECIC provided that our region, specifically for childcare providers as employers, has about a 16% staff shortage rate. But it goes a little bit farther because we know that our workforce also needs a variety of different hours available to them, a variety of different care options. And so we also know that on the flip side, folks want that hours open 24/7, for example, or overnight or over in the weekend. But we also know right now our current state of non-standard hour care is that only about 5% of our providers in the region are open in that 24-hour care. So we know that there's other gaps that come along with it. You have the staff shortage, both within the early childhood sector, but you also have this labor force participation rate that is being impacted by it because of the other options that are now limited due to a number of reasons.
And as Emma mentioned, as far as the workforce shortage itself, so we know that cost and availability of childcare itself is a big issue, but that childcare workforce is also impacted right now. And those childcare positions, as Carrie was saying, require specific training and specific credentials, which is a financial investment to undertake for those individuals. But many childcare business owners are in a really tight spot when it comes to trying to balance being able to pay their staff sufficiently and the cost to families. And the average wage of a childcare provider in Eaton County is about $23,000 annually. And so again, if we're looking at the members of the childcare workforce being able to afford cost of living, that wage is limiting that individual's ability to participate in the economy and afford their essentials. So the wages for childcare workers themselves is another nuance to the complexity of the childcare conversation.
Sarah, that's a really good segue to the next part of the conversation is how do we create that pipeline for potential childcare providers and teachers and administrators as we go forward. And that's one of the main reasons, of course, why CapCan is engaged in this conversation, because we are trying to help students find the right match and fit for the career that they want to pursue. And then what education do they need in order to be able to achieve that? But as you alluded to, Sarah, if it costs you $12,000 to pay for childcare, that is essentially a college education. And if you are a student with children and you're not working maybe as many hours as you need to in order to be able to afford childcare and college, it's even more complicated. So one of the opportunities that Carrie, I'd like you to talk about now is the application that you made to the Early Childhood Investment Corporation to start a early childhood apprenticeship program. And if you could share what that will include, who you're partnering with, and what will the benefits be for the student doing this apprenticeship that makes it more affordable and accessible to them.
Yeah, absolutely happy to share about that. So just to set the stage a little bit for this part of the conversation, the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, ECIC again, had released an RFP, a request for proposal, that had two different portions related to apprenticeship work. Through their research, they knew in some parts of the state, like West Michigan Works, Grand Rapids area, they had already started to do some of this apprenticeship work in terms of apprenticeships. So they had grant opportunities to grow or to expand those. And then there were other regions that they really targeted, including our region, with what they are calling design grants. And the whole program concept is really to look at early childhood apprenticeship opportunities. There are a number of approved programs in Michigan, as well as across the country, that are registered with the U.S. Department of Labor, and that allow for someone to get the hourly component that is needed in order to sit for that first credential, the CDA. And so the thought with these design grants is that the regions that are awarded this funding, including ours, will pull together a coalition and talk about what are those opportunities, what sort of classroom work might be required, what does it look like in terms of the hours in a classroom setting that you are learning those skills needed to become a teacher, what does that look like? And also to support our employers in this space in looking at some of those grow your own models. They may have support staff who maybe don't have that credential yet, but that would really be a strong fit to become a teacher. So how do we put them on that pathway while also minimizing some of the costs that they're going to have to bear potentially, you know, in terms of student loans or debts. So we are still very much in the beginning phases here in our 3 counties. We have partners including Lansing Community College. We also have some of our ISDs and RESAs who are part of these conversations because they're already doing career tech education programs that are connected to this work. And then we also have a number of our early childhood business owners as well who are a part of it. And this ranges from smaller childcare businesses to some that are nationally accredited by the National Association for the Early Childhood of Young Children, so NAEYC accredited. And so we're really excited. We have a project manager who's going to be leading up this work, and we're hearing that there's going to be other opportunities down the pipeline with ECIC for those of us who have this design grant to really just start these conversations to then look at the implementation side. We know there will be costs that are associated if you have to do coursework or if you have to sit for this credential in order to be able to get it. And we want to make sure that we're thinking through thoughtfully, how do we look at leveraging resources so that the cost that an employer or the employee themselves are going to have to bear is going to be nominal or minimal in nature, instead of them having to take on this cost all on their own without the support. So we're really excited about it. It's very different than what we've done here before, but what we are hearing, and the employers, partners we're working with are already a part of our coalition. So it really dovetails directly into the work we've been doing regionally with our coalition. And it's just another avenue for us to talk about really for pipeline development. So the timing is excellent. There's a lot of interest, and I think it is just another way we have to look at tackling the challenges of looking at building the pipeline, but also for our employers to retain their employees and look at offering some of these training opportunities to grow their own.
So one of the things that I said when we started this project originally is I feel like I'm coming full circle. I started my career working for the Michigan Head Start Association and been an advocate for early childhood for a long time. And so I'm excited, but also worried, right, that we need to continue to educate the next generation of advocates for early childhood. So as the co-chair of our local childcare coalition, we're really calling upon the community to help us continue to advocate and speak up for high quality and affordable childcare in our region. So Emma and Carrie, would you talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that our coalition have come up with to sustain our work, to get involved, and really build off the momentum that we've started to create in the community over the next 5 to 10 years?
So I think one of the main ones that we've heard throughout our meetings in the past year has been some type of regional hub or resource for providers, for parents and caregivers, and for employers or your main business industry, so that all of them have somewhere to go to refer to data or options for them to pursue or adapt into their own business practices or their own lives. And we've heard that as a need throughout. We've also heard that providers would really like some business support. Often we don't think of providers necessarily as a business. We see them almost as a separate kind of category. And if we really look at how they operate, it's very similar to small businesses that we see throughout our region. They have financial pro formas. They have business plans that they reference. They need these things that our small businesses in our community also rely on. So it's making sure that they have access to resources and that they have access to that help that we already have existing and tapping in. And then the other one that I really want to mention is having our employers be more active in the conversation. I think that has been a constant trend in knowing that to sustain this, we need business support. We need businesses to look at this as an issue, because it is for them, for their productivity, for the retention of their employees. And we want to make sure that as we move ahead, that they are part of the conversation, that they are also there thinking through what creative ways they can be more family centric in their businesses, but also how we're able to really bring up the entire structure so that we're not here, like you said, 30 years from now.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, I'd echo everything that Emma has already mentioned. I'd also add, and I think it's really important for our regional lawmakers and our municipality representatives to be a part of this conversation. Something that we've heard consistently from early childhood employers is that it can vary from where they're looking at locating to what is required in terms of starting a business, getting that business up and off the ground, from building. It looks different depending on where they're at. So I think if we can look at trying to ease some of that burden to be able to actually grow or start new early childhood employer places of business and to have some consistency there, that would go a long ways to helping to ease some of that burden for our employers in that population. I also think it's really going to take a lot of advocacy for our lawmakers as well, though, because there's going to need to be some funding that is put into budget to be able to support this work and to continue to support this as a long-term solution. This is not something that, we're talking about 5 to 10 years. It's going to take that for us to be able to make an investment in early childhood. And I think we also have some bias that may exist. Daycare is out there, and there's daycare, childcare, early childhood. We have to recognize that early childhood is just as critical for our children's success as K through 12 in order to set them up. And really, it's going to take us talking about that and distilling some of those myths that may be out there to help when we're talking about things like pay parity, so that we can make sure that those educators who are working in these centers are getting paid a wage that is livable. So I think that from my perspective, the more we can get those who have a voice and may be able to make some of those decisions at our table, the stronger we'll be and better positioned we'll be for it. I'm very grateful right now that the governor is very invested in talking about this and tackling at it with pre-K for all in Michigan. And I'm really hopeful that we'll start to see this be the shift that is needed in Michigan to really address some of those underlying challenges that, as you said, Michelle, have been cycling around for a very long time, and that we keep coming back to because we know it's not fixed yet.
Right. And I know there's a direct correlation between early childhood preparation and college access. So it's all comes full circle, generation to generation. So
It does.
appreciate you sharing today.
So it seems like we're coming to the end of the interview, and I have one last question. We end every interview with #CapCanKnows. Sarah, Carrie, and Emma, what is one thing each of you know about childcare to end our conversation? Who are you and what do you know? We're just gonna go.
So I'm working with a few different coalitions across the state. And one thing I know is that there are passionate, intelligent people who care deeply about childcare, who are working on this issue. And I've heard more than one childcare provider say, after our meetings where we're sharing data or making plans to improve childcare, I didn't realize that so many people cared about this issue. They'd expressed that they had felt alone in their struggle to make ends meet and provide high quality childcare for their families and pay their staff an appropriate wage. But seeing how many people are engaged in this effort really offered them a boost to know that people do care and people are working together to create positive change in the state of childcare for their region.
Mine is regarding some of the regional data that we pulled at the very beginning, and that was finding out, as of this year, we have over 417 licensed childcare programs that offer over 18,000 childcare slots, or the capacity for slots, but that doesn't account for all of those that we consider unlicensed or who may use other family or relatives or neighbors, and it also doesn't include sometimes what we think of after school care or summer care. And it's just really interesting because we still have the gap that Sarah mentioned earlier in the conversation. And I'm not sure that the data profile will ever be fully complete, as many data folks know, but it's definitely interesting to see in our region those numbers come through and just know a little bit more deeper about what that means for our region.
From my perspective, what I know is that early childhood education is critical for our future workforce. And the sooner that we can start to have those conversations and recognize the importance of that work is equally important to the work of K through 12 educators, the better we'll all be for it as we're preparing the next generation to come in and to fill the openings that are going to be coming through the pipeline. So the more that we can all do to lift our voices in different ways than we have, to pull in people that maybe haven't been a part of the conversations historically, the stronger I think we'll be to really turn the page on some of the challenges that have been faced here.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank Carrie Rosingana, Emm Bostwick, and Sarah Himes Greer for joining us on the podcast to chat with CapCan. For more information on CapCan, please be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or visit our website at capcan.org. Thank you all for listening for us today, and we will see you again soon.